Lejla, please tell my story. I met my boyfriend a few years back through mutual friends. We were both in relationships at the time, so it wasn't until January this year that we finally started dating. He was a championship boxer living abroad, and I was working for a royal family from the Middle East. I must explain a little bit about the beginning because you would honestly think that he was Prince Charming. He would fly to London just to spend a few days with me. He would send me the biggest bouquet of flowers to let me know he was thinking of me. He would even buy me foundations in the right shade. So that you can all get a better picture of what my life was like before him. I was already used to flying around in private jets and living at the Dorchester whenever I was in London. I had my own money and I guess I was what you like to call an independent woman. So his flashy lifestyle really wasn't what drew me in. It was the way he treated me initially. It was his words and all the promises that he made. I felt like there was no other woman in the world apart from me. Just before lockdown, I moved back to the Middle East with the family that I was working for. I knew that this would mean that I was closer to my boyfriend and we'd get to see each other more often, and the thought of this excited me so much. We continued seeing each other back and forth until one day he sent me a message saying, "I would really like it if you could move in with me and spend your life with me." And I didn't need to think about it twice. I knew straight away that my answer would be yes. So I gave up my successful job and moved country to be with him. And here I was, a 20-something-year-old seemingly living the dream. But it wasn't long before the abuse started. At first, he controlled where I was going. I then slowly gave up my friends because he said they were no good for me. He would then tell me lie after lie about his whereabouts, his income, and only things outright like his house and his car. He also would accuse me of cheating on him with almost any man I spoke to, including taxi drivers. After a while, I realised that he was taking drugs, and sometimes he would go off on benders and leave me isolated alone in the house. I begged him to give it up, to get help for his addiction and his mental health. He promised to do just that, but then I would find fallouts on the kitchen worktops whilst I was cleaning, and whenever I confronted him about it, he would call me paranoid and say that I was just seeing things. I knew I wasn't though, because he even went as far as spiking my drink once with MDMA. One night, we went to a party and I was already sporting a black eye from a previous incident. I asked him to calm down because I felt like he was being a bit flashy. He got angry and said that I was the one who was showing him up in front of our friend. So he dragged me to a bedroom, locked the door, and if it hadn't have been for a friend of mine banging and screaming on the door telling him to let me out, I would have walked out there that night with another black eye. I'm sure you're all wondering at this point why I continue to stay. But the truth is I was chasing that high that I felt with him at the beginning, and he had this hold over me that made me feel like I couldn't live without him. And after every incident, he would buy me extravagant gifts and take me on weekends away as a sorry. And of course, let's not forget the countless times that he promised to change. One day, my mum called me and asked if it was a smart decision for me to send some money over to her just in case of an emergency. At first, I told her to stop being silly because I was never going to return home anyway. But I don't know what it was. Something about what my mum said to me that day planted a seed in my head, and I took her up on her advice. And then I had this awful feeling in my gut telling me to book a flight back home. So I did just that. I booked a ticket for a week's time. Just for a quick break, I told myself. I was so right to do so, because what happened next will never leave my memory. One evening, he returned home completely intoxicated from drugs and alcohol. He started on one of his rants where he would accuse me of cheating on him. This time, he thought he was with a friend's husband. I asked him to stop, but it just made him worse. And before I knew it, he tied me up by my hands and feet and repeatedly punched me in my face and chest. He was a professional boxer, so I had no way of defending myself against him. He then picked me up and said that he was going to throw me off the balcony. I screamed and begged him to let me down. And I don't know where I got the strength from, but somehow I managed to hold onto the balcony door and get out of his grip and escape from being thrown to my death. After the incident, he immediately stormed off out the house with my phone and didn't return until the morning. The next day, a friend of mine helped me pack up my clothes and she took me to the hospital, where I found out that I had damaged ribs, eye sockets, and a bleed to the brain. The injuries were so severe that the doctors called the police against my wishes. When the police arrived, I lied to them and I told them my attacker had already left the country. I was so scared to tell them the truth. and I didn't want him to be arrested and charged for what he did to me. A few days later, I flew back to England with a face that was completely unrecognisable. And I really wish this is where my story ends, but it doesn't. He kept on calling me and texting me and sending me flowers and promising me that this time he was going to get help because he couldn't live without me. And I started to believe him again. I even began planning my return back to him until a friend of his told me that he was lying and he had in fact turned up to his house one night drunk and drugged up. And I knew that I had to walk away. I told him that I could never return to him and that I was done with the abuse. He threatened to kill himself, as he had done so many times before. So I just ignored it and turned my phone off. I woke up the next morning to nothing. No calls or messages, and immediately I knew something was wrong. I found out later that day that he had committed suicide. I broke into a million pieces and I wanted to do the same. I couldn't imagine a world where he wouldn't exist. How could I continue to live without him? My whole heart is filled with guilt now, and I will hold that until the day I begin to realise that it's not my fault. But I will never turn my phone off again, and I will never go to bed on an argument with anyone. He knew how much I hated that, and he wanted control over me forever. And right now it's still happening, even though he's no longer here. And I wish that he'd just listened to me. I wish that I'd felt empowered enough to tell the police the truth that day, because right now he could be in prison instead of dead. And in no way am I using his drug and alcohol problems as an excuse for his abusive behaviour. I'm holding him accountable for the choices he made. So don't romanticise my story. This is not a tale of Romeo and Juliet. This is about me nearly losing my life at the hands of my abuser, and in turn, him taking his own life because he didn't reach out for help in time. So please, ladies, don't ignore red flags. Please get help and get out. Please don't end up like me and my dead abuser.